Hey everybody, Bob Huffman here with BC Comix, and I'm here today with Mack Doyle. He's a local legacy player here at BC Comix and surrounding area. Played in a lot of different venues throughout the years. He's top aided some pretty major events, including some Star City Games events and such. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, Mack?
My name is Mack Doyle. I don't know. I've been playing Legacy for about 5 years. I love the format. I'm a big fan of doing what I love when it comes to Magic, and what I love is Legacy. So
yeah,
make a big effort to promote the format and play it whenever I can. So
yeah, cool, man. Right on. Yeah. All right. So recently we had a 55-person Legacy qualifier here at BC Comix, and you won it.
I did.
Yeah. What was that deck you played?
I played Death and Taxes.
Death and Taxes. Where does that get that name?
Death and Taxes is a white weenie deck, and the phrase goes that there are only three things that are inevitable in life: death, taxes, and a white weenie.
And white weenie. All right.
Yeah. It's also a reference to the deck having like inevitability. So.
Okay. A lot of resource denial, so you're going to pay your taxes to this deck.
Right.
Yeah.
It taxes its opponent out of the game, you could say. So.
Yeah, cool. All right, sweet. So, you know, a lot of changes happened in Legacy, recently, right? So walk us through the process of how you made the decision to show up with this particular deck.
Well, I've always been a big fan of Aether Vial decks in Legacy. I've never been a huge fan of casting Brainstorm in the format. I like that card a lot, but
yeah.
But in general, I really like creature-based decks. Death and Taxes was a deck I'm going to play at the Grand Prix, so I decided to bring it to the BC Comix event to get practice with it. And I like Death and Taxes a lot because it doesn't have a lot of really bad matchups. In general, it's 50-50 against the field, and it gives you the opportunity to outplay your opponent, which I really like because I've been playing the format for a long time. So hopefully that means I'm able to outplay some people. So
going into a large event like a Grand Prix, you want the consistency and the fact that it's got a broad-based win against a lot of different things, so that you can just rely on your play skill to get you there.
Right, exactly. There's not any matchups that Death and Taxes really has a really tough time with, and so especially not in the Tier 1 decks. The Tier 1 decks, Death and Taxes is pretty evenly matched against all of them.
Okay.
So.
And those Tier 1 decks right now being?
Miracles, Eldrazi, Shardless Bug, Grixis Delver, Sneak and Show, Storm, Reanimator, just common decks that you'd expect pro players or like better players to be playing at the Grand Prix.
Sure, yeah.
You could definitely leverage, you have pretty good matchups against them.
Okay, all right. So going into a Grand Prix or an event like the one that we just did here, what are you really hoping you don't run into?
Like I said, there's not a bunch of terrible matchups. I'm still figuring out the Eldrazi matchup because the Eldrazi deck is new to the meta, and so I'm trying to figure out a sideboard configuration that'll work. Other decks I would have trouble with are decks that are not susceptible to mana harassment, so decks like High Tide, where they play all basic lands, or a deck that I have trouble interacting with would be like Omniscience Show and Tell would be tougher than say Sneak and Show, because Sneak and Show I have the Karakas to deal with the legendary creatures.
But you can't lean on that with the Omniscience version. Right,
exactly. Like Burn is a surprisingly tough matchup if you have an awkward draw because you play so many non-basics. You can hit by Price of Progress.
Yeah. Now, while we're on the subject, Eldrazi's new, right?
Yeah.
And it's clearly changed the format to some degree.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that now? In my experience with Legacy I played pretty much just one or two decks, and the primary one being Reanimator that doesn't really change over time. It's basically your same, pretty much 75. You tweak a little bit here and there. Is that where Eldrazi is, or does it reflect more like the modern versions where there's like a myriad of different versions that you're playing with the deck?
I definitely think there's a couple different versions of Eldrazi you can play. With any deck like that, it just comes down to you play the build that beats the decks you want to beat. So
Okay, sure.
there's like a white splash build of Eldrazi that seems pretty good. The mana is not quite as good, but you get to play multiple Karakas, which gives you a better matchup against like the Sneak and Shows and Reanimators. The white gives you like Rest in Peace out of the sideboard, which is good against lands and things like that. But again, you're sacrificing consistency of your mana to have more flexibility. And then so there's also like there's mud versions that are just like mono colorless that play Dismember, Gutshot, and Warping Wail as their only removal.
Okay.
And I think that's the more standard list you're going to see are like the colorless versions. But yeah, but there's the white splash. There's also, I've seen black splash Eldrazi for oh god, can't even remember. But I've seen other different builds.
Other
of that
different
deck.
builds. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's still kind of finding itself a little bit.
It is definitely.
Okay.
I think that's the cool part about the archetype is that Legacy very rarely gets just like a brand new archetype introduced to it.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting.
It is. No, yeah. Like it's the last time we had a major archetype introduced to us when Miracles were printed.
Sure.
Was when that totally changed the face of like what used to be land still and is now.
Now, so
Miracles.
kind of had a reason for asking that because, like right now, I feel like there's a lot of people that picked up Eldrazi pieces to play them in Modern, and then obviously it got banned. So they're probably still sitting on a lot of those pieces. What would your advice be to somebody that had those pieces and were kind of looking at Legacy? Is that a deck that would be viable that they could jump into relatively easily?
Yeah, absolutely. Eldrazi is definitely a deck that's about sequencing. It's an aggro deck, so it benefits from curving out. But in general, the deck's pretty straightforward to play. There aren't you don't have to necessarily be an expert at brainstorming to play the deck because it doesn't play brainstorm.
Yeah.
So it's definitely an aggressive deck, which is where you want to be. I think when you're newer to the format, you want to be playing a deck that will punish people for misplaying their control decks rather than you misplaying with your control decks.
Yeah, you want to play a more linear strategy that rewards you when your opponent messes up rather than having to be the person that doesn't make mistakes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the cool part about Eldrazi is that it is definitely an avenue for newer players to jump into the format.
Yeah.
It does a lot of different things that the format, as of right now, is not super prepared for. So I think it's a good choice.
So it seems to be a good time to get into Legacy then.
No, it's always a great time to get into Legacy, but absolutely, no, I think with Eternal Masters coming out and Eldrazi being a standard legal archetype that is also viable in Legacy. The other thing about Eldrazi too is that that deck plays a bunch of staples. It plays Wasteland, it plays Cavern of Souls. Like these cards go in a bunch of different decks.
A lot of different decks,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so even if you're picking up like Ancient Tombs, for example, or
that goes in a lot of combo
decks. It goes in a lot of combo decks. It goes in
or prison decks.
Right, it goes in prison decks, exactly. So even if you are spending money on more expensive cards, those cards have a lot of long-term value if you stick with the format.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Mac.
Yeah.
I really appreciated the input. And
thanks, Bob.
Yeah, maybe some people listen to this and come down to BC Comix and get into some Legacy games. So we'll see you then.